Hello everybody and welcome to another session of Who's Who in the Zoo, and today my guest is Karyn O'Brien. She is a tenancy coordinator. Now this is a role that some people think on the surface of it they know what it's about, but I'm pretty confident they're going to find out that there's a lot more to this role than we all think. Let me tell you a bit about Karyn. Karyn is a person who has been working in retail and setting up retail tenancies for over 15 years. She's been involved in some of Brisbane's more recognised and appreciated urban renewal spaces. I'm talking about West Village and I'm talking about King Street. She has also been involved in working with Lendlease in some of the urban regeneration projects down in Victoria. I'm confident we're going to hear a little bit about those in the next half hour. The purpose of this podcast, Karyn, is really to help listeners develop a sense of empathy with your role. So I'm almost begging you to brag about how difficult your job is and what you're doing, so that people do appreciate what's involved in your role. So before we start too much further, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about yourself, what attracted you to this type of job and this role, and where are you right now? So a little bit of the sort of the CV, if you like.
Yeah, sure. I have actually got more than 20 years doing this now. I'm terrified actually admitting that. But I started almost by accident. So working in construction is kind of my second career. When I was back in Ireland, I actually worked in advertising and got a bit bored. Came to Australia, met an Australian, married an Australian, and then decided to look for a different sort of career. And I ended up working in the property department of Bank of Queensland. And after building lots of bank branches for years, I went over to the dark side and started working for landlords and as a tenancy coordinator for Mervac. And basically what a tenancy coordinator does is they look at taking the tenants, once the lease deal is signed, they pick the tenants up and bring them through that design and construction phase and actually get them open. And then they leave them to their own devices. So we're just in that little moment of time between signing the deal and getting open, and then we never see them again. I always say that you're doing your job well if everybody involved kind of hates you a bit. So you're probably annoying. You're probably annoying centre managers. You're sometimes annoying the tenants. You're always annoying the leasing guys. It's you tend to try. You're trying to get everybody onto the same page and get the thing happening. So it's I kind of fell into it. Did it for a few different places, and then eventually decided I'm going to do it for myself. It's like you said, it's quite niche, it's quite specialised, and there's a lot of people out there who think they're doing it well but aren't. It's kind of seen sometimes as a stepping stone into bigger project management, but you need an awful lot of different sort of skills from just regular project management to do it. So I started up my own company 4.5 years ago, and we do tenancy coordination and client-side project management for retailers.
Okay, so obviously there's enough demand that you said farewell to, I think it was Lendlease that you're working with, and set up your own shop, if you can pardon the pun, called Setting Up Shop, and you now find yourself almost in the conflict zone, I guess. Although it need not be that way, but I can imagine that some of the challenges are that the tenants who you're working with have limited understanding of construction. How much of a bonus or a disadvantage is their level of knowledge about the construction process?
The biggest problem that I see on a really regular basis is the fact that they think it's not going to cost them an awful lot of money. So if I had $1 for every time somebody said, I built my first house for less than that, when they're faced with fitting out a 50 square metre tenancy, I'd be rich. It always costs more. And they see a big incentive that they're getting as part of their lease, and they think, going to go on a holiday when this is over. And it's like, oh, that's not even going to touch the sides. So it is a big disadvantage, and that was one of the reasons that I actually set up the company, was because I've really felt for all these people who ended up getting themselves into such a horrible financial position that they weren't actually able to make any money. You know, they would be forced to open the shop because they had a lease, but they had just completely overextended themselves financially. So part of what I do, which is away from the tenancy coordinator side but kind of related, is I will actually work with tenants to review the building, review things like fit out guides, and let them know how much it's really going to cost them and help them negotiate their lease a little bit. Because as a tenancy coordinator, there's nothing worse than, you know, you get halfway through the process, they've designed something beautiful, and then they start getting quotes in and they just are horrified and they can't see a way to get out of it. So it's definitely not a good thing that they don't have the knowledge.
Yeah, so I guess it's quite a heady mix of deadlines, money, and of course these technical issues and also code-related issues. And for lack of experience in any one or all four of those areas, they need a tenancy coordinator. So I'm still confused though, Karyn. Who is your client? Are you engaged by the tenant? Are you engaged by the landlord? Are you just engaged in 50-50 partnership with these guys?
No. So tenancy coordinators are part of the landlord's team. So initially, and still in some cases, it's almost a box ticking exercise. You know, there's a whole list of things that tenants have to have before they open. They have to have their lease, but they also have to have their certificate of classification. Lots of landlords will actually look for the backup of all of their certificates from all of their different engineers and all their trades. They have to have paid their insurances. They have to have paid their first month's rent deposit. They have to have done all these things, and the tenancy coordinator's job initially was very much to just go, yep, got that, tick, 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 and away we go. But the way that we approach it at setting up shop is we are there to help them, because mum and dads have no idea. They don't even know how to find a designer to start drawing it. So while we work for the landlord and the landlord is our client, we are very much there to help the tenant actually get open. We're not just there to crack a whip and, you know, force them to do things. You've got to really pull them along on the journey. If they don't have a designer, how do we find one? How do we find a builder? How do I tell my designer that I really hate the design? You know, how do I make sure that I'm addressing all of the defects? You know, it's really quite simple, because I have seen tenants who are like, oh, I can't actually tell her that I really hate that colour, or I need a bigger counter, or, you know, they get nervous about telling professionals that they don't like something. So I'll often sit in with them and actually talk to their designer on their behalf. It's very much a helping the tenant role.
So in terms of coordination, we're talking then about the coordination of tasks by various stakeholders. And so that sort of starts to sound like a project manager. Is there any subtlety in the difference between project manager and tenancy coordinator?
There's a bit more to tenancy coordination. So project managers will know construction, for example, and they'll know a building contract, but they may not understand a lease very well. So some of the things that we will often get asked by the landlords is, we've been asked to do XYZ by the tenant, so how can we do that or not do that, or what would be a solution to this problem that fits within the lease that we've got with the tenant. So leases are a little bit different to a construction contract, so it's got that certain subtlety to it, and we find that that's really important with our clients, the landlords, to be able to say to them, look, this is what the lease actually says, this is what you have to do, but maybe this is the limit of what you have to do. You don't have to go beyond this for the tenant. You might choose to because of a relationship or something like that, but you don't have to under the terms of the lease. So we help the landlords with that kind of thing as well.
Okay. So the landlord engages you, and in some ways I'd imagine there's a protection of our asset. You know, don't let some guy come in and just put in a really stinky kitchen exhaust, comes to mind. don't, don't let some guy come in with really loud music and upset our apartment owners. I don't want to second guess any other sort of stories like that, but is the protection of the landlord's asset front of mind for them, or are they got other things that are important to them?
It's on the landlord. So, everybody's a little bit different. But yes, protection of the asset, making sure that the tenant can actually deliver what they've promised, because you'll get all kinds of it's very much a sales relationship that between the leasing agent and the tenant initially. So landlords want to make sure that this amazing cafe that we're going to get is actually an amazing cafe. So making sure right from the outset that the design is correct, and then that they build in accordance with the design, and that they get all the certifications. So you are involved that whole way through that build process. And yes, they do want to make sure that they're not going to be left with a mess at the end of it. So it can come down to things like, well, how are you managing your rubbish? Because we don't want people, seeing rubbish all over the tenancy, or that you're walking great big crates of rubbish through a commercial lobby 5 times a day, that kind of thing. So it can come down to quite nitty-gritty little things.
Okay. So on a day-to-day basis, what are we talking about? I presume there's meetings, but in addition to meetings, what else is going on, Karyn?
A lot of it is making sure that people are actually on track. So, you might get a tenant, and I'll get handed the deal maybe 3-4 months before they're due to even start on site. So it's making sure that have you engaged your designer? Where's your design at? And giving them targets to try to hit. And then things like doing site inspections with engineers like yourselves, with designers, pointing out, every building is different, pointing out the little idiosyncrasies, the little weird things that have and haven't been done that you need to deal with, and making sure that they can deal with them. So it can be everything from being up on top of a roof looking at where some air conditioning plant is meant to go, being down in a basement pointing out where your grease trap is and how you're going to have to do a great big run across the top of a whole load of car parks, and to sitting down with the designer, to sitting down with council. We often go in and do council inspections with tenants. It's extremely varied. That's the fun of it, is it really is one of those no 2 days are the same, and you get to talk to everybody, which I really like. So you kind of you know everything that's going on. Good fun. All right, so I'm getting a clear view that in terms of adding the most value to the project, you're really about organising the tenant on behalf of the landlord, so that day one, hopefully the tenant's making money, making their rent payments, and they haven't damaged the building. Have I left something out in how you add the most value to a project? Look, I always try to encourage clients to engage us as early as possible, because we're used to dealing with buildings that are largely finished, and there's not an awful lot that we can fix at that stage. But if you engage a decent tenancy coordinator like us early on in the process, we can suggest ways for them to actually build the building, and point out things that could save them money, that could make the tenant's life easier during fit out, and actually smooth the process down the track. Because we often find that people, especially in mixed use developments where the focus is on the bulk of the building, which is above, and the retail gets a bit forgotten about down the bottom, and they can, you end up with food tenancies with no back doors. So all of their deliveries have to come through the front door, which isn't a great look. You can end up with undersized grease traps. You can end up with tenancies that have no way of getting kitchen exhaust out. It's very hard to address those things, and by hard I mean expensive down the track. So we like to get engaged as early as possible so that we can influence that sort of design and just make sure that the whole project is set up well enough to make it easier to open tenants down the track.
All right. I'm probably fishing now for a couple of stories. What's a bad day at the office look like?
Well, there's the times that the tenants realise it's going to cost them 3 times what they thought it was going to. That's never fun. There's the times when they can't make payments to their builders and their builders stop work, and then you've got the landlord sending them rent invoices and they're not actually even trading. The most frustrating days I have are when a building has been designed to suit the base builder. I'm trying to be cautious because sometimes the easiest way to build a building is not necessarily the most fit for purpose.
Friendly.
And you end up having to go back and fix things, and that's frustrating, and it always annoys me that people think, oh, the retailers will fix it, and retailers by their very nature do end up fixing it. They just want to open up their shop and serve the public and do their thing, so they will make it happen. But the stress involved with that and the extra cost for both the tenant and the landlord is frustrating. So that a bad day is when you realise that there aren't enough toilets in the building to actually get a liquor licence for a restaurant. Or when you realise that, we can't actually, I know you've signed a lease, but we can't give you kitchen exhaust. There's actually no way for us to do that. Those kinds of things are frustrating when we haven't been able to influence and fix that earlier in the process.
So you're in a very difficult place in some ways, because you're beyond the place where you can make changes, but you're probably closest to the person who kind of needs these changes made. So you're the first one to hear them complain, you've leased me a space with no kitchen exhaust or grease trap access. And I can imagine you're there going, correct. I didn't personally design it for you, but you're absolutely correct. That's the scenario you're in. So, yeah. All right.
Yeah, it does make it hard, but then you get to try and help them figure it out. And it's not always as straightforward as, well, like, let's dig a great big hole and stick in a grease trap. You can look at different ways of doing things. It's that kind of trying to be out of the box to figure out the most cost-effective solution for everybody. That sort of problem solving is good fun.
The coronavirus will have jolted your business around significantly, I presume. What are some of the virus-specific challenges that have come out in the last 2 years?
Well, for our business, retail was hit very hard. Capital dried up. Tenants were obviously terrified of taking spaces, but things have picked up quite a lot, and we've been very lucky in Queensland. We obviously haven't been nearly as hard hit as the people down south. Some of the things that we're seeing is, it's stuff like we need more space. You need more space in restaurants. People feel more comfortable if they're further apart. How do we deal with hand sanitizers and cleaning things and all of that sort of stuff? So from a design point of view, that has changed. And now we're seeing, supply chain and labour shortages. So that's all been quite challenging. It's impacted in so many ways. And then you see the tenants that you've actually opened, and they have reduced numbers of customers. We've got snap lockdowns, they can't get staff to actually just make a coffee, that kind of thing. So it's been really quite devastating for retail. But we're getting there, we're getting back to it, so slowly but surely.
I think a lot of people enjoy a good coffee, or even a nice meal out. So those sorts of places should still be okay. Now, you and I have often talked about food and beverage. What other types of tenancies are you kicking around with?
There's probably a little bit less F&B these days. It has kind of cleared out the people who were probably going to fail anyway, that whole acceleration of failures. But we're seeing a lot more medical usage these days. I've done 2 chiropractors in just the last 3 or 4 months. For a couple of different clients, so there is a bit more medical coming up. One of one of the big ones that I'm looking forward to at the moment is in West Village. It's called Soak Bathhouse, and this is like nothing else I've ever done before. It's on top of a building, and we're putting in pools. So you can go and, you can have a hot soak or a cold soak, or all sorts of different sort of spa treatments, and that is really interesting. We've had to do an awful lot of structural work to hold up these pools with the weight of the water and the weight of the concrete, and that's it's you always get something new and challenging. I think every year I learn something different. So we see everything. We see everything from clothes shops to chiropractors to restaurants to it's everything.
Okay, so in terms of the big challenges beyond COVID, so let's just say, okay, we've talked about the changes to design and the actual impact on supply and demand. What are the other challenges that you see coming? And I'm thinking in sort of big picture topics. Is sustainability a big issue? Is climate resilience a big issue? Which of these issues that we often see do you think are front of mind or becoming front of mind for tenants?
Look, in a particularly local example is things like Toombul. I don't know what we're going to do with that one for second time in 10 years. It's flooded out. Looking at the impact of significant weather events on properties is a big deal for an awful lot of landlords now. I mean, even just the rain that we had, forget about the flooding. There was roofs that had never ever leaked, and they just could not handle the amount of rain that we had over the last few months. So we had things leaking, we had gutters going, we had roofs coming in. So there's a lot of that really extreme weather challenge that's coming up that people are having to look at. And quite a few landlords now are focusing a lot more on sustainability and on energy efficiency and how are their assets going to be appealing for investors, because at the end of the day that's how it works, is that they have these assets for the major institutionals and they sell on investment in that, and people now are saying, well, I want ethical investing, I want to know what you're doing for climate change, how are you addressing this, how are you managing that through your business. So we see all kinds of things, from separation of waste, particularly in F&B and hospitality. So you've got to be careful that you're recycling everything, composting things, you're using recyclable containers and coffee cups, stuff like that, and all the way through to, we're not going to put gas into our developments anymore, you're going to have to figure out a different way to cook. So and as tenancy coordinators, we will then help tenants understand that, because it's one that I haven't had to do yet, but I know it's coming, explaining how you cook without gas. It's just such a given for an awful lot of F&B guys, it's just going to blow their minds.
Yeah, so this is a skill set that I don't think you mentioned at the start of the show. You're going to have to become an expert on things like cooking without gas, so that's great. Well, that's good. That's good. You're never going to be bored. Karyn, one of the last questions I've got for you is, I'm thinking about all the people that you bump into. Do you have any suggestions or almost sort of requests about what they do? How can what they do assist your job or assist your role in being successful? Yeah,
I would have to go back to thinking about the end result right at the start of a project, and always keeping that in mind. From day one, when you start looking at the feasibility for a project that you're going to build, it's very easy to cut things and remove things without thinking all the way through how it's going to impact people down the line. And I would love to see developers really think about what they are building for retail, particularly in mixed use. It's really important. Nothing hurts me more than seeing vacant shops at the bottom of buildings. I think it's such a waste. It's it's depressing for an area. It doesn't help whatever you've got above you, whether that's retail, whether it's residential or commercial. It's such a missed opportunity, and I mean there's a few issues there. Some of it's around the level of rent and how the project stacks, all of that kind of thing. But rather than just thinking the retailers will figure it out, I'd love them to really pay a bit more attention to it. I think mixed use is the way of the future. We've seen all of the big shopping malls really start to suffer a bit as people were a bit more wary of, well, you know, I don't want to go in there. There's too many people. It's, you know, it's closed in atmosphere. So they're going to have to look at their repositioning. But I think that mixed use is really going to come into its own as we start to create all of these communities and these spaces around cities where you've got a bit of everything. Just don't forget about the retail. Think about it early on and make it easy for your retailers to come in and build.
Okay, so to reflect some of that back to you, you've talked about beginning with the end in mind, and I think in your conversation there you're really thinking about the landlords thinking about when this is finished, this will look like West Village, for example. But just to unpack that a little bit, you're probably jumping into 12 or 15 retail spaces, say, and they're all going to have a mech engineer and an architect and a certifier. I mean, that must be just difficult that you've got 15 certifiers, for example, on a project, all with a slightly different view of what the landlord's building is about.
It can be, if you've got a little bit of a heritage edge in there, that can certainly throw people for a loop. But again, my job is to explain all of that to the tenants team. So, you know, I'm always, you know, it's a regular thing, just sending out, here's all of the documents, here's the fire engineering report, here's the Section J report, here's all the CAD files for that, here's the base building certification. It's being able to package all of that up really easily and just send it out to people so they've got all the information they need. And then if they've got questions about, well, you know, where is this meant to go, or which grease trap am I connected into, and, you know, do I need an ESP unit, or will UV do the trick? It's explaining all of that through to them, but generally speaking, that's not too difficult of a job, because they know what they're talking about, and I hope I know what I'm talking about. So it's, you know, it's sometimes getting the tenant to understand why they need an ESP or a UV and what the impact of that is on their business down the track. So it's that's not too bad dealing with all those professionals. It's the people who don't get it, like the tenants or like inexperienced development managers who, you know, don't want to ask questions. That can be tricky.
Okay, so designers who are working on particularly a retail tenancy, one of the first things they ought to do is find out who is the tenancy coordinator.
Absolutely.
And get from them not just that information of DWG files and so on, but also I think try to tap into what is that end vision of when this place is finished. Because I'm sure soak bathhouse wasn't thought of. If you're beefing up columns and things like that, then I'm sure they weren't thinking this is where we're going to put these pools. So this has come along post event.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Karyn, for being my guest today. I really do appreciate that. We will look forward to seeing you around the traps as you continue to sprinkle fairy dust on all of our little urban renewal projects around the place. Thank you for being my guest.
Thanks, Rob.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.